Hey, this is Rob, and this is episode 35 of the Folly Coffee Podcast. Let's get it brewing.
1, 2, 3, go!
So for this episode, this was actually technically led by Austin Romansky over at Crema. It was an interview of me for their newsletter. Crema made an interesting move recently, announcing that they are going completely off of social media in an attempt to directly connect with their customers. It's a pretty cool move, pretty innovative. I'm excited to see how that turns out. And so this is the first video interview that they did for their newsletter. And Crema is this service that we are a partner with, where they have a number of high-end specialty coffee roasters on their website, and it's almost like the Netflix of coffee, where you can just set your playlist and coffee automatically shows up from roasters all around the country. And so I will let this one go, but this one went all over the place, from like personal interview, like background on Folly, and just some random stuff too. So enjoy.
Okay, cool. Well, this is Austin and Lance with Crema.co, sitting with Rob from Folly Coffee. How you doing, Rob?
I'm good. How are you?
Not bad, man. Not bad. I was just curious, how do you pronounce your last name?
It's Bathe.
It is Bathe.
Everybody says Bathe, but it has an E at the end, so it's just like the word bathe.
Sweet. Well, I was looking at it, and I'm like, I bet it's pronounced Bath, but I wish it was pronounced Bathe, because that'd be so much cooler. So lucked out on that one. Cool. Well, we've partnered with Folly for a little while now. We love you guys, and just wanted to get to know you, a little bit of the story behind Folly. And yeah, first question I had was, where are you from?
I was born and raised in Plymouth, Minnesota, which is just west of Minneapolis.
Okay, very cool. And where's Folly based now?
So we are now based in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. This is a pretty recent development. We started in Silver Lake, Minnesota, which is like an hour west due of the cities. And then we recently moved to St. Louis Park, which is about 15 minutes west of the cities. And we've got some like really cool moves planned that I can't quite talk about yet. But you can imagine how being closer to the cities, how some of those moves might come along in terms of customer interaction. But I will preface it and say it's not a cafe. It's not something I've never ran a cafe. We're interested in roasting coffee, but it's going to be a way that we can interact directly with our customers. That is like, we're probably a couple weeks away from starting to be able to aggressively hint / tell people what it actually is.
Wow.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's exciting, man. Cool. We look forward to hearing about that. How's that move? Did that move go? Is this still underway? It sounds like, but
it was good. So Ken was our head roaster out at Silver Lake, and he is the one who I met when we started Folly Coffee out in Silver Lake. And then now Jeff, who is now our head roaster, he's a nationally ranked coffee taster. He's placed top 15 last year in cup tasters on the Coffee Champ circuit. He was top 2 in regionals this year before the nationals got cut down. The transition basically happened when it was Jeff started to roast last year. And so the idea was, once he gets proficient enough in roasting, that it would be kind of a natural handoff of the baton that would allow us to be able to move into the facility we're in now, because it's kind of a shared space. And so it's a roaster that other roasting companies are utilizing as well, which allows us to keep our overhead low as we're small and we're growing, that we can still roast closer to the cities without having to make that like really, really financial huge risk of buying a roaster, buying a space, which, looking at the financial landscape of things now, it seems like a good move. Not that we're looking back, not that anybody saw this coming.
Yeah.
But this, to put it in perspective, the final move was the second week of April. And then it was about a month after that. March 16th was the date in Minnesota when all the COVID closures were announced.
Huh.
crazy.
Man.
I'm curious, can you tell us a little bit about, I don't know if all our users know about it, but I loved your running challenge a while back. What was that about, and how did that go?
I don't know if it's a good memory or a nightmare. Well, so the COVID closures hit, and in our first, so we launched in January of 2018. Our first year was primarily grocery stores, and so we were direct delivering to grocery stores. Our second year, we picked up some really awesome cafes, restaurants, and so at that point, we really had no focus online. And so when COVID hit, that was immediately the focus. Was like March 16th. That day I went home, built a website in a couple days, relaunched, but then we were looking, and there was a good launch. And so a few weeks after that, as it became evident that things were going to remain closed, we're looking at it going, we're fortunate that we have low overhead. We're going to stay in business. Things definitely still suck, but like in the grand scheme of things, we're pretty good shape as a business. But we're looking at the community going like, things are really rough for a lot of people out of work. How can we leverage the business that we have to give back to the community, as a lot of small businesses already were? But then the add layer was, I wanted to do something like stupid and fun, because the general mood during this entire time has been like, everything is sad. And this is even before the recent cultural landscape, especially of Minneapolis. But when we were just talking COVID, everybody was bummed, everybody's quarantined, getting stir crazy, and there's like not anything fun going on. And so the idea was, how do I create something fun? And almost like, if you're familiar with the term Schadenfreude, is the German term for, there's no English word for it. It's a German term that means taking pleasure in someone else's pain. And humans love this, but they'll never admit it. And so the idea was,
only the Germans would make a word for that.
Exactly. And so the idea was to support this organization locally called Open Arms. They're an organization that makes meals. One of my best buddy works for them. They make meals for people who have severe illnesses that they can't make meals or they can't shop for themselves. And so the idea was, we would donate back $1 of every bag sold during that time, a week-long period, to Open Arms. But in addition, to really incentivize people, for every bag purchase, I would run a kilometer. And so initially it was a mile. I don't run. And so I went to Jeff and was like, hey, in the next week after this thing, I'm going to run however many bags we sold. And he's like, you can't do miles, man. Like, if we sold 40 bags, he's like, that's more than I was training for the marathon. That he's because he's a runner. And
let's change it to feet. You run 1 foot per bag.
Yeah.
And so we changed it to kilometer. But then it just took off. I wrote like looked for a form, literally just like a blank PR form online. I filled it out with local business owner to run 1 kilometer for every bag sold, and our local TV station WCCO picked it up. And Jason Duresha he's an awesome, like, he's one of the anchors there, but he's also huge in the food scene. He's got a really strong Instagram following, and so he's got a lot of eyes on him, and he promoted the heck out of it. And by the end of it, we sold like 208 bags of coffee in a week, which ended up being the equivalent of like 5 marathons in 7 days. And like I stay active, but I'm not a runner. And so it ended up being like over 18 miles a day. And so my day, so the first day I went out and hit like a hard, like 24 miles all at once. And that was like, I can't physically do that again. And so the rest of the week was like, basically like, go out, run, hobble 4 miles, like do something for 2 hours and run 4 miles, and just like do that over and over and over. But finished it on the last day at a total of 130 miles.
Still, dude, that's amazing.
Yeah, that's impressive.
Cool, man. Good job. Well, speaking of, what was that combination you said? Fun and stupid. I think that's a good combination just to live by in general. But we have a couple of questions that fall into that category, just to get to know you a little bit. The first one is, would you rather live without the internet or live without air conditioning and or heating?
I think at this point, the internet has become too tied into absolutely everything that it has almost become more essential than AC and heating. Now, that being said, I'm in Minnesota, where it's either really hot or really cold, but the internet at this point, like, I couldn't even be in business. Like, I think websites are really cool. I go to them every day. And so I don't know if you guys have used websites before.
I've heard about. I read about them in a dictionary once.
I heard that you can get a virus from.
Oh yeah,
so I don't mess around with that.
They're really cool. If you go to the right ones, it's really cool to use websites. So as much as it pains me as a guy that runs real hot, have to be internet.
Got it. So in the winter, you'd be fine. Well,
in the winter,
die. You would die.
I sleep with the window open in the winter. Just layer up a few more blankets.
There you go. Perfect. Okay, cool. Would you rather only be able to use a fork for the rest of your life, or only be able to use a spoon?
Interesting. I'm going to say fork because in most things where you could use your hand, no, I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to go spoon because things that you would need a fork for, it would be way easier to use your hands, but you can't really scoop up like soup or liquids. And so like things you would prod with a fork, you could easily use your hands to eat. At a spoon, like liquids, it'd be way harder to like scoop with your hand and eat. So I'm going to go with spoon.
Sweet.
Good
Solid
choice.
answer. Solid answer. Finally, probably the most important one. Would you rather have, can't even say it. Would you rather have edible spaghetti hair that regrows every night, or sweat maple syrup?
Oh God.
Spaghetti can be of your liking.
I'm
angel
gonna
hair, whatever you want.
I'm gonna go with the spaghetti hair because it's localized to one region, and you could figure out something where you contain it. But if you have maple syrup sweat, just everything would be terrible. Like
Yeah.
there's no day you go by where something doesn't. That would be awful. I'm gonna go with spaghetti hair.
Cool. That fits with your comment about running hot. So it's all coming together.
Yeah, I think so.
We've learned a lot about you, man. Just a couple of questions. I love
Just
it.
the key things.
Yeah, just the most important parts of your personality.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's shift into what people actually probably care about this. How did you get started in coffee?
Yeah, so right out of college, I did sales for Boston Beer Company. It's like Sam Adams, Angry Orchard, Twisted Tea, and I moved to North Chicago. And I was in charge of like the northern part of Illinois up to the border north of Chicago. And Sam Adams is an awesome organization to work for, and they have really heavy beer education, and it just like instantly clicked for me. I was already into craft beer. It's part of the reason I applied for the job. Became a huge beer nerd, got my Cicerone certification, which is kind of like the sommelier of beer world, like started going for my advanced Cicerone. And so I learned to cook, literally to pair with beer. I started learning a lot about how flavor worked. And I had a coworker that used to sell specialty coffee. And at the time I was just, the sales guy drinking coffee just to wake up and stay energized throughout the day. It never even occurred to me that coffee was something that could taste good on its own. And he saw me drinking just, whatever hotel coffee when we were at some meeting. And he's like, no, like put that down. Here's a list of roasters you're allowed to go to from now on. And at that point I was living in Champaign, Illinois. And my new territory had become the southern half of the state where I was doing like distributor management and like key account sales. And so it was a couple hours from St. Louis. And one of the roasters that he pointed out to me was Sump Coffee out of St. Louis, which is absolutely amazing roaster.
Mm-hmm.
I got really lucky that the first place that I went to actually get good coffee is still to this day, I think, one of my favorite roasters. And I still remember it, naturally processed Ethiopian Yirgacheffe, which is like the ultimate blow your mind coffee for someone who's never had something like that. And so I just get this black coffee. It was just the first thing on the menu. And the second I tasted it, it was like, what is going on with this cup? Like it was winey. It was like blueberry. There's floral notes. It was like distinctly not bitter, which I think that's something that a lot of people really into coffee forget, that the most intriguing thing about great coffee is that's just not bitter. Like I don't have to put anything in it. And it was just an instant wormhole. I had just failed the advanced Cicerone and I was studying for 3 hours a day for 3 months for that exam. And I fell 3 points short. And I was considering retaking it, but the second that happened, that almost filled that portion of my life, and that became coffee. And so over the next couple of years, I was checking out anytime I was traveling for work or anytime I had a weekend free, I would, cheap Southwest flight out to whatever city I could get to or drive to Nashville and just instantly was hooked on all these different coffees. And then I did a trip out to Seattle. And I think if you've never been, you expect Starbucks to be what everybody's excited about. This is the hometown brand there. You would expect everybody there has a ton of pride behind Starbucks. This is like our hometown company. But when you go out there, the thing that was intriguing to me is the younger coffee drinkers were not talking about Starbucks. They're talking about these new third wave light roasted style of coffee roasters. And I went out there and had some of the best coffee experiences I've ever had, and none of them were Starbucks. And that was the first time where it occurred to me that this was probably going to become a big thing in the US. That if it happened to this extreme for me, that for the casual coffee drinker, it could become a thing. Maybe not quite to the obsession I took it, but it's hard to go back once you taste great coffee. And that was the first time that I looked into the business side of it. And just being in beer, I kind of knew that food and beverage trends tend to be about 10 to 15 years behind in the Midwest from the West Coast.
Oh, yeah.
And so I started looking at the trends of coffee, and what I noticed is that the number of coffee drinkers remained like remarkably stable over the past prior 8 years to that, but the price people were paying continued to steadily incline, which means that the number of coffee drinkers stays the same, but they're willing to spend more on coffee, which means that the quality of coffee overall is increasing. And then at that point, I tried to convince myself out of doing it. Like I really liked my job, liked everyone I worked for, the career was going well. But after like a year after that, it was kind of like, I have to do this. And so I ended up quitting my job in May of 2017, moved back to Minnesota to go live with my parents. Prior to that, but at this point, I didn't know how to roast. I had a sample roaster at a Bullet Aleo R1 and was roasting for fun. But my assumption was that, hey, I'll just pick up roasting and I'll be the roaster. But what I thought would be like this closet of coffee information was like this endless hallway. And I realized quickly that if I was going to build a business and do this, I couldn't learn how to roast effectively unless I was doing over a period of like 5-10 years and also start a business. And so I knew I needed to find someone. And so originally, I actually had someone lined up when I moved back. They bailed after I moved back, so I was left in Minnesota with the plan, but nobody to roast, and ended up meeting Ken, our then head roaster at a farmer's market. And he agreed that if I helped him physically build his roaster to get a commercial license, that he'd roast with me. So that summer, I was working like 4 jobs as like strength coach at my old high school and barback bartender at night, and then eventually like a barista at a bakery and driving Lyft at night and building out this facility. And we launched in January of 2018. And so the role was basically like he was roasting the coffees, but I was selecting which beans we were using and helping profile the coffee to like really bring it down to that lighter side of things to bring out the flavor of the coffee. And I was able to go out and pre-sell and talk to places before we opened. And so we were able to hit the ground running pretty fast.
Wow. Man, that's quite a tale. Yeah, I think me and our other owner of Crema come from office coffee. And so we spent a lot of years in offices selling, and we kind of spearheaded the third wave coffee in Seattle in offices because it's the same thing. Everyone got Starbucks or Pete's or, something else even worse. And so when we would get in there and like taste these, just like you said, this like natural Ethiopians or these other coffees, like to be able to see people's reaction for the probably similar to what your first reaction at some point, it's like to actually taste coffee for the first time was such an amazing privilege, like to see it over and over again, and people just be like, what's in here, what flavoring is in here? And you're like, no, that's like that's coffee. Like, no, there's like a blueberry syrup. And it's like, no, coffee has a flavor.
And it's always been crazy to me because coffee is something that somebody who's a coffee drinker probably drinks it just about every day. And what other thing can you look at that I drink every day and I don't care what it tastes like, or I don't care what the quality of it, or even not that you don't care, but that you're not even aware of it. And that's what blew my mind. I've been drinking coffee for years. I didn't even know about it. And so that's why it wormholed so quickly. And I think we see a lot of light bulbs turn when we're doing our samplings, because that's who we're focusing on is, we're creating coffees that your like high-end coffee nerd, your coffee snobs, if you will, are going to like them. They're going to enjoy them as well. But what we find, it's the people that have never had a great cup of coffee that's like intentionally sourced and roasted. Those are the people where it's like, wait, what? Like this exists? And especially because when you talk, even the health benefits are, you're talking like, this is something that not only does it increase in quality, it's more delicious, but it's also way better for you because you don't have to do cream. You don't have to do sugar. You can drink it black. And it's almost like, I feel like I'm yelling into the void sometimes when you're trying to like tell people about it, because they've been so inundated with marketing from big coffee companies. And like, your Folgers, your tin can is like, we are the greatest cup of coffee you're going to have in the morning.
Yeah.
And it's like, they've been hearing that for years. So when we come along and we're like, no, like it's actually really good. And so we've been trying to do a lot of stuff of like getting people to taste coffee that aren't really experts, whether it's in person or in video, to kind of get that light bulb to go, hey, maybe I should try this if I've never thought about the coffee I'm drinking.
Yeah.
Sometimes you even see like it's almost like a pride thing, like, oh, you care how your coffee tastes? Yeah, I drink the grossest, dirtiest stuff, black and whatever. It's like, why are you proud of that?
Yeah. And it's funny because I've seen that, and I think the reason that is because the high end of coffee has always been very snobby. It's actually happened. It happened in craft beer a few years ago too, to a certain extent. I call the term I heard that really stuck to me is the winification of craft beer, where you don't feel like you're welcome to drink it. And so you'll notice that I pull a lot of my inspiration for our branding, our marketing, our communication from the craft beer world. That I don't want coffee. I don't want the winification of high-end coffee. And so I think, because high-end roasters have been like, you don't even understand what you're drinking. This has notes of burned cardamom and all these notes. You're like, I don't know what that is, so I assume this isn't for me. I drink this bitter black stuff, and I'm fine with that. You can,
Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, I would say you guys do an incredible job of really, that term is good, the winification. You guys definitely provide a good quality product without the snobbery. You keep the light down to earthness, and like it's super approachable. Like every aspect of it is definitely, from our end anyways, and our users, it seems that you're doing a good job of that. So we appreciate that.
Yeah, the way I put it is, I'd rather have a coffee snob taste our coffees and go, oh, this is actually pretty dang solid, than have someone who's never had a cup of coffee be like, that's not for me. I'd rather have it be that way versus coffee snobs or coffee nerds, which I am definitely both of those. Right. I would rather have it be that way than they're the ones touting your brand, because you can alienate. And so we work really hard to try to like make it very clear with our processes and transparency about what we're doing. But ultimately, it's like, people can get the messaging of high quality products anywhere, but like, how do you get them in? How do you keep their attention?
Yeah, exactly. No, and I think big part of our mission is we want to reach people, like you said, kind of all sorts. And same thing, we want the coffee snob to come to Crema and be like, oh wow, they got really good stuff, more than I would ever need. And then also we want to make it approachable and have people that know nothing but just know that there is this idea of better coffee, and we want to be that entry for them.
Yeah, and I had a couple questions for you. I'm curious if you track this kind of thing, because when we first signed on with Crema Co, I assumed that it was the high-end coffee drinker, that it's like, I want a selection of the finest roasters. And what I found is our Classic Joe, which is kind of what we consider our intro coffee. It's a lot of South American, like nutty, chocolatey, very approachable, is really popular on Crema Co. And that that was intriguing to me. And so it brought to question in mind of, I'm curious if you know kind of the breakdown of like whole bean versus ground sales on Cremico, meaning that like your coffee snobs, your nerds are only drinking or are only ordering whole bean. And so I'm curious about like ground versus whole bean. And then if you notice any, what level of roast is selling better for you, or like what origins, if there's any trends that you're noticing in that sense.
Yeah. So the ground to whole bean is pretty close to, last time I just pulled the numbers, was like 90-10 whole bean. So
Okay.
like very vastly whole bean. With the roast profile, we found that over the last year, we have like 7 different variations technically, but I would say between light and dark, it was probably like a 70% lean toward dark or lighter coffees, and then just 30 or so in the dark realm. But that has kind of slowly shifted, I think, as we've made a special effort in the last year or so to reach just everyone and more focus on people. I conduct interviews with our users pretty regularly, and one phrase that I kept hearing over and over again as I was doing these interviews was, we wanted to up our coffee game, or I wanted to up my coffee game. And I just kept hearing that. So I used that in some marketing and some outreach, and it did pretty
Literally
well.
written on our classic Joe bag, like that word for word.
Yeah. So I think that's seems to be the mentality that a lot of people have. And so maybe that's why, where we kind of have the same mission there, where that might be why there's a lean toward that bag.
One survey question that would be really interesting, and I want the results if you do this, because we don't have the network you have. I'm curious what people's main purpose of a coffee subscription is. Is the coffee subscription, is it their only coffee they're drinking, so they choose a frequency that it's going to never be out of stock of coffee? Or is it like your backup plan, that I'm going to be going out and finding interesting coffees as they pop up on Instagram, as I go to my local shop and see coffees I like, and my subscription is to make sure that I have my backup coffee, or that I'm always in stock, or like my second option? Because that was something I was thinking about. That's like, that would be my goal with Folly, is that you're ordering it regularly as like, this is my dependable coffee. I know I like the house bean because I like fruit forward coffees. It's always going to rotate. I might not know what that origin is, but it's super dependable if I like fruit forward coffees. Whereas if they're going to go for like super interesting, unique coffees, those are probably going to be more of like a one-off that you're going to find at roasters, that we do some limited releases like that. That would be an interesting piece of data from your users about like, why is this your only coffee you drink? Or is it just like, to know that you always are going to have coffee coming?
Yeah. In the interviews and stuff I've done, we could definitely include it in the survey for sure to get more solid. But it seems that Crema, the reason people usually go with Crema specifically in not another coffee subscription site, is because of the control, and is because of the ability to adjust per order. And so I've found, in talking to a lot of our users, that it's their sole coffee source. Yeah. And because we can, with the playlist functionality, people can, add 10 different, 20, 100 coffees and choose when each one comes, and set the frequency whenever they want it, then they kind of just rely on it because they set it to exactly what they need, and they never worry about running out. And then we just launched the ability to buy things instantly. And so between those two on our platform, I think it's definitely more, it's a little bit of the like, I have to look into the exact numbers, but I think there's a pretty even mix of like, I set my playlist on repeat. I get one coffee every week, and I love that coffee. And then a lot of people have 100, 105 coffees in their playlist, and they just kind of mix those around, and they just set it and forget it and don't want to have to worry about it. But I don't know. I'd be curious too to see exactly those numbers. But I would guess, given the way Crema works, that it's going to lean more toward the people that just rely on it for everything. They're not supplementing.
Because the instant function that you added actually kind of triggered that thought. was like, oh, this will be people with existing subscriptions that it's like, hey, I also want to try that coffee before it runs out. You know, I want to try this one before it runs out. You know, this roaster just posted this one. I don't know how long they'll have that in stock.
Yeah.
Because that's an interesting thing about that side of specialty coffee too, is there is an urgency to certain coffees.
Yeah. That's a cool piece that it's such a hard balance to strike where you want everything to be available, but like the part that makes it cool and unique and special is the fact that it is limited release each coffee. And so you want to make sure people have a way to order that and rely on it. But then the thing that makes it cool is that it is kind of, you know, liquid, and that you can't just get the same thing whenever you want. You kind of got to follow it. So yeah, that's a tricky one, but I feel like most of our users love that and understand that about specialty coffee, especially, and why it's so good. Yep. So my next question was about starting Folly, but you kind of went through that a bit. So I think we get the story there. Maybe, I imagine you do a lot of cuppings, but would you say you have a daily coffee routine that you stick to? Or
yeah, I have a pretty consistent daily coffee routine, and this was just after playing around. A lot of it has to do with timing in the day, because I found that if I drink a cup of coffee anytime I feel like one, it generally leads my day completely off the rails. And so my general coffee routine is I like to wake up. I'm usually up around 6, and I like to wait about an hour, hour and a half before I have my first cup of coffee. That was based on some research I found on cortisol levels, that you want to let your cortisol levels naturally rise before you have your coffee, because that people think that you become addicted to coffee just no matter what, but it actually has to do with when you drink it. If every morning you drink your coffee, the second you wake up, your body naturally learns, this is now my new thing instead of cortisol. And instead of naturally rising our cortisol levels, we're going to replace it with caffeine. And so if you wait hour, hour and a half, it's not going to replace that effect, and you don't get the effect of headaches, caffeine addiction. Because a lot of people are like, oh man, you must need it if you don't drink it. It's like, no, you know, there's certain days where I realize I haven't had one from the afternoon and there's no side effects because of that. And so I'll typically have my first cup like an hour, hour and a half. It also gives me time to think about what I want to drink, which is always a nice part of the morning. And my first cup's usually pour over V60, single cup, super, super clean, super bright, light bodied, great to have in the morning. I find that you can manipulate the variables of brewing really easily with certain coffees. And so that's the one I like to do first thing in the morning. And then in the afternoon, right now it's been a lot of cold brew. We started a separate cold brew business in September with my business partner Brandon, called Filterra, where we're kegging high-end cold brews from different specialty roasters in the Twin Cities. And he started making these pouches, and that led me off the rails for quite some time when I had those readily available. But I've been drinking a lot of cold brew during this time, especially because it's like 90 now. But usually the afternoon, I'll tend to get a little bit more experimental. I rotate that one through. I just got the Flare Neo espresso in, and that I can tell you that's going to be my brewing method in the afternoon for the foreseeable future, because that thing's pretty dang cool. But you know, the French press, cold brew, I've got the AeroPress, and then I got this thing a couple months ago called the American Press. It's like this experimental one. It's a weird one. It's like a French press, except it's got like, you put the coffee in a canister that's got a thinner filter on the bottom and then a bigger one on the top. So it creates pressure as you're pushing down. It's really weird, but it's fun to play with.
Very cool.
And it kind of depends on the style of coffee too.
Yeah. Nice. That's a good point about the waking up. I never thought of it that way, affecting the addiction stuff.
Yeah.
I've never really, because I drink coffee all day, and I've never, and this, I don't know if this could just be personality stuff too, but I've never had that addiction to coffee issue. Like my wife, if she goes without coffee, she gets a headache and has like withdrawals. But I don't know why, but I've never had that. But then think about it, I don't usually have it right when I wake up, so that could be part of it.
Yeah, and it's funny because I think especially specialty coffee, and people who really like high-end coffee, they're generally not drinking it because they're like, oh, I need this caffeine. Maybe it starts that way, but you find more and more that they're drinking it because they legitimately want that that flavor profile. They enjoy it. Now I will say that Jeff, who is now our head roaster, he's cupping so many coffees a day that he had to create a really strict caffeine limit. And so he's like, it's a blessing and a curse. He's like, my life is now full-time coffee, but I don't just drink coffee anymore. He's like, any cup I have is usually like, maybe I'll cup and not spit it out, but he's like, almost all coffee I have now, I can't just have a cup because I'm drinking so much coffee throughout the day that at a certain point it's all, tasting and spitting so that he can continue the high volume of tasting that he's doing for quality control and like nailing in profiles. I cup, but not to that level that I need to be concerned about.
Nice. I imagine it's similar for beer and distilleries. That like you obviously can't just taste all day, or else.
Yeah, little different.
I guess you can smell. You can just sniff when it comes to some stuff, but coffee you got to taste.
Yeah, little different on the beer and wine side if you go too far.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, we have one more question. I was going to try to do this consistently with all our roasters just to see. You kind of touched on specialty coffee and your experience with it. I want to challenge you to 30 seconds. Explain. Basically, we'll wrap up the question into why is specialty coffee worth the money? Obviously, that's one of the barriers to entry for people is like, it just costs too much or it's too expensive. So we're going to give you 30 seconds. I'm going to time you, and you just kind of cover as quick as you can why it is that, a cup of specialty coffee roasted properly is worth maybe a little bit more money.
Mm-hmm. On the top end, easy answer. It tastes so much better. There's a whole range of flavors. You're going to notice the quality in the end cup, and it's not even going to be debatable. You're going to notice when you taste them side by side, it is way better. On the other side, from the sourcing side, I will say if you're not drinking specialty coffee, someone in the supply chain is being underpaid. They're being taken advantage of 100%. It's not up for debate. I don't care which company it is. They're not paying specialty coffee prices way above fair trade prices. Someone in the supply chain.
Dude.
Awesome answer.
Yeah, that covers that's perfect. Beautiful. Yeah, well done. All right, cool. Well, I was trying not to get this to go too long, but you're enjoyable to talk to, so I'm blaming you for that. But otherwise, that's it for me. I really appreciate the time. This is awesome.
Yeah, appreciate you having me to test this format out. I think it's really cool what you're doing. Really interested to see how it works for you because I haven't heard of anything like this, jumping off social media and going straight to your customers. So as you get new insights, let me know because it's something that we're experimenting around with everything of how can we interact directly with customers, and it's hard as a small business to be able to do that. But so any new strategies and methods, I'm keeping my ear down to the ground.
Yeah, for sure. One thing we're genuinely surprised by is we include a survey with every newsletter, and the amount of people that legitimately do it and spend some time on it. I usually have a bunch of yes or no or quick multiple choice, but I try to put in a couple more long phrase answers where they actually write stuff out, and we have been amazed at hundreds of people spending obviously quite a bit of time filling stuff out. So that we found has been really insightful. And I had this weird, it's a stupid, I want to say light bulb moment, but it's actually too stupid to even say that. But I was sitting down and I had two stresses on my brain. And I was like, I have to write this week, Sunday Sippin', our newsletter. And I have to figure out what we're going to do with packaging. I wasn't sure which packaging direction we should go. Should we have roasters send their own packaging? Should we do compostable? Should we do recyclable? There's so many options. And I'm I had these two issues. What am I going to make the survey about? And what kind of packaging am I going to use? I'm I should just make the survey about what packaging to use and then take my users' answers as what I'm going to do for the other thing. And just by doing that, I solved my two big problems for that week. So we made the survey all about packaging. And now we have all this input from our users, and we're looking at a pretty obvious answer based on what they think. So Now we kind of have direction that way, and it was based on what our users want. So it's kind of the perfect little balance. So we're trying to do more of that. We hope that that's able to continue working well.
Yeah, with something that's a relatively low cost in the grand scheme of things, and it's a subscription service, I think customers are probably pretty aware that the more they give feedback, the better their experience will be. Whereas, like, if you were to go out and buy a boat and then they'd get a survey about how can we make boats better, you'd be like, crap, like,
Yeah.
so you're saying my boat's not that good? Whereas with this one, it's like, if you can make the experience better, it's going to continue getting better for them. And so we've loved being on Cremico. The coolest thing for us is the national exposure, because we're hyper focused on Minnesota. That's like when you're small, you have to, like, that's the easiest way to directly connect is local. And so this has really been the first thing where on a national scale, we found, like, we've been getting orders consistently from around the country from Cremico, and that's been really cool to see, just like where our coffee is going to on a weekly basis. And I that's maybe someday we'll get there just organically on our own, but that's been an awesome way to be able to connect with people and just get our coffee in people's cups. It's been really cool.
Sweet. Yeah. Well, again, we've loved partnering with you guys, and look forward to many years of continuing to grow.
Cool.
All right, man. Thanks a lot. We'll give you the rest of your night, and really appreciate it.
Yeah, so let me know how the recording thing works. Hopefully it gives you the option to save it before we close here.